we're ready to read chapter 1 of Little House on the Prairie. So you're going to need your book. Make sure you have your book with you. You're going to need the vocabulary sheets. We're not going to use the black books. We're just going to write them, the definitions really small right here, or you can write them on the back. And you need your trifold. Don't forget to fold it so you can use it as a bookmark, and don't forget to put your name on it. So before we begin reading, our word that we're looking for is papoose. Papoose. So as you listen to the chapter, think about what the word papoose means. We'll come back and discuss it at the end. We are also working on the skill. Based on the chapter, record what causes the family to move. So we're looking for 3 reasons that they are going to move from their home in the Wisconsin woods to the prairie. And then we will color the states on the map that were mentioned in the chapter. Open your book to page 1. And follow along with me. Chapter 1, Going West. A long time ago, when all the grandfathers and grandmothers of today, actually probably the great-great-grandfathers and grandmothers of today, were little boys and girls, or very small babies, or perhaps not even born. Pa and Ma and Mary and Laura and baby Carrie left their little house in the big woods of Wisconsin. They drove away and left it lonely and empty in the clearing among the big trees. And they never saw that little house again. They were going to the Indian Territory. Pa said there were too many people in the big woods now. Quite often, Laura heard the ringing thud of an axe, which was not Pa's axe, or the echo of a shot that did not come from his gun. The path that went by the little house had become a road. Almost every day, Laura and Mary stopped their playing and stared in surprise as a wagon slowly creaking by on the road. Wild animals would not stay in the country where there were so many people. Pa did not like to stay either. He liked a country where the wild animals lived without being afraid. He liked to see the little fawns and their mothers looking at him from the shadowy woods, and the fat, lazy bears eating berries in the wild berry patches. In the long winter evenings, he talked to Ma about the western country. In the west, the land was level, and there were no trees. The grasses grew thick and high. There the wild animals wandered and fed as though they were in a pasture that stretched much farther than a man could see. And there were no settlers, only Indians lived there. One day, in the very last of the winter, Pa said to Ma, "Seeing you don't object, I've decided to go see the West. I've had an offer for this place, and we can sell it now for as much as we're ever likely to get. Enough to give us a start in a new country." "Oh, Charles, must we go now?" Mother said. Ma said, not Mother, Ma. The weather was so cold and the snug house was so comfortable. "If we are going this year, we must go now," said Pa. "We can't get across the Mississippi after the ice breaks." So Pa sold the little house. He sold the cow and the calf. He made hickory boughs and fastened them upright into the wagon box. Ma helped him stretch white canvas over them. In the thin dark before morning, Ma gently shook Mary and Laura till they got up. In firelight and candlelight, she washed and combed them and dressed them warmly. Over their long red flannel underwear, she put wool petticoats and wool dresses and long wool stockings. She put their coats on them, and their rabbit skin hoods, and their little red yarn mittens. Everything from the little house was in the wagon, except the beds and tables and chairs. They did not need to take things because Pa could always make new ones. There was a thin snow on the ground. The air was still and cold and dark. The bare trees stood up against the frosty stars, but in the east the sky was pale, and through the gray woods came lanterns with wagons and horses, bringing Grandpa and Grandma and aunts and uncles and cousins. Mary and Laura clung tight to their rag dolls and did not say anything. The cousins stood around and looked at them. Grandma and all the aunts hugged and kissed them and hugged and kissed them again, saying goodbye. Pa hung his gun to the wagon bows inside the canvas top where he could reach it quickly from the seat. He hung his bullet pouch and powder horn beneath it. He laid the fiddle box carefully between the pillows where jolting would not hurt the fiddle. The uncles helped him hitch the horses to the wagons. All the cousins were told to kiss Mary and Laura, so they did. Pa picked up Mary and then Laura and set them on the bed in the back of the wagon. He helped Ma climb up to the wagon seat, and Grandma reached up and gave her baby Carrie. Pa swung up and sat beside Ma, and Jack, the brindle bulldog, went under the wagon. So they all went away from the little log house. The shutters were over the windows, so the little house could not see them go. It stayed there inside the log fence behind the two big oak trees that in the summertime had made green roofs for Mary and Laura to play under. And that was the last of the little house. Pa promised that when they came to the west, Laura should see a papoose. "What is a papoose?" she asked him, and he said, "A papoose is a little brown Indian baby." They drove a long way through the snowy woods until they came to the town of Pepin. Mary and Laura had seen it once before, but it looked different now. The door of the store and the doors of all of the houses were shut. The stumps were covered with snow, and no little children were playing outdoors. Big cords of wood stood among the stumps. Only 2 or 3 men in boots and fur caps and bright plaid coats were to be seen. Ma and Laura and Mary ate bread and molasses in the wagon, and the horses ate corn from nose bags, while inside the store Pa traded his furs for things they would need on the journey. They could not stay long in town because they must cross the lake that day. The enormous lake stretched flat and smooth and white all the way to the edge of the gray sky. Wagon tracks went away across it, so far that you could not see where they went. They ended in nothing at all. Pa drove the wagon out onto the ice, following those wagon tracks. The horses' hooves clopped with a dull sound. The wagon wheels went crunching. The town grew smaller and smaller behind, till even the tall store was only a dot. All around the wagon there was nothing but empty and silent space. Laura did not like it. But Pa was on the wagon seat and Jack was under the wagon. She knew that nothing could hurt her while Pa and Jack were there. At last the wagon was pulling up a slope of earth again, and again there were trees. There was a little log house, too, among the trees. Laura felt better. Nobody lived in the little house. It was a place to camp in. It was a tiny house and strange, with a big fireplace and rough bunks against all the walls. But it was warm when Pa had built a fire in the fireplace. That night, Mary and Laura and baby Carrie slept with Ma in a bed made on the floor before the fire, while Pa slept outside in the wagon to guard it and the horses. In the night, a strange noise awakened Laura. It sounded like a shot, but it was sharper and longer than a shot. Again and again she heard it. Mary and Carrie were asleep, but Laura couldn't sleep until Ma's voice came softly through the dark. "Go to sleep, Laura," Ma said. "It's only the ice cracking." Next morning, Pa said, "It is lucky we crossed yesterday, Caroline. Wouldn't wonder if the ice broke up today. We made a late crossing and we're lucky it didn't start breaking up while we were out in the middle of it." I thought about that yesterday, Charles, Ma replied gently. Laura hadn't thought about it before, but now she thought what would happened if the ice had cracked under the wagon wheels, and they had all gone down into the cold water in the middle of the vast lake. You are frightening somebody, Charles, Ma said, and Pa caught Laura up in his safe big hug. We're across the Mississippi, he said, hugging her joyously. How do you like that little half pint of sweet cider, half drunk? Do you like going out west where Indians live? Laura said she liked it, and she asked if they were in the Indian country now. But they were not. They were in Minnesota. It was a long way to Indian territory. Almost every day, oh, that's better. Almost every night, almost every day the horses traveled as far as they could. Almost every night, Pa and Ma made camp in a new place. Sometimes they had to stay several days in one camp because a creek was in flood and they couldn't cross it till the water went down. They crossed so many creeks to count. They saw strange woods and hills and stranger country with no trees. They drove across rivers on long wooden bridges, and they came to one wide yellow river that had no bridge. And that is our river. That is the Missouri River. That was the Missouri River. Pa drove onto a raft. You can see that in the picture. And they all sat still in the wagon while the raft went swaying away from the safe landing and slowly crossed all that rolling, muddy, yellow water. After more days, they came to hills again. In a valley, the wagon stuck fast in deep black mud. Rain poured down and thunder crashed and lightning flared. There was no place to make camp and build a fire. Everything was damp and chill and miserable in the wagon, but they had to stay in it and eat cold bits of food. Next day, Pa found a place on a hillside where they could camp. The rain had stopped, but they had to wait a week before the creek went down and the mud dried so that Pa could dig the wagon wheels out of it and go on. One day, while they were waiting, a tall, lean man came out of the woods riding a black pony. He and Pa talked a while. Then they went off into the woods together, and when they came back, both of them were riding black ponies. Pa had traded their tired brown horses for those ponies. They were beautiful little horses, and Pa said they were not really ponies. They were Western Mustangs. They're strong as mules and gentle as kittens, Pa said. They had large, soft, gentle eyes and long manes and tails and slender legs and feet much smaller and quicker than the feet of horses in the big woods. When Laura asked what their names were, Pa said that she and Mary could name them. So Mary named one Pet, and Laura named the other Patty. When the creek's roar was not so loud and the road was drier, Pa dug the wagon out of the mud. He hitched Pet and Patty to it, and they all went on together. They had come in the covered wagon all the long way from the big woods of Wisconsin, across Minnesota and Iowa and Missouri. All that long way, Jack had trodden under the wagon. Now they set out to go across Kansas. Kansas was an endless, flat land covered with tall grass blowing in the wind. If you've ever driven in Kansas on the highways, you know that that's true. Day after day they traveled in Kansas and saw nothing but the rippling grass and enormous sky. In a perfect circle, the sky curved down to the level land, and the wagon was in the circle's exact middle. All day long, Pet and Patty went forward, trotting and walking and trotting again, but they couldn't get out of the middle of that circle. When the sun went down, the circle was still around them, and the edge of the sky was pink. Then slowly the land became black. The wind made a lonely sound in the grass. The campfire was small and lost in so much space, but large stars hung from the sky, glittering so near that Laura felt she could almost touch them. Next day, the land was the same. The sky was the same. The circle did not change. Laura and Mary were tired of them all. There was nothing new to do and nothing new to look at. The bed was made in the back of the wagon and neatly covered with a gray blanket. Laura and Mary sat on it. The canvas sides of the wagon top were rolled up and tied so the prairie wind blew in. It whipped Laura's straight brown hair and Mary's golden curls every which way, and the strong light screwed up their eyes. And that means made them squint like this. It does not mean that it messed them up. Sometimes a big jackrabbit bounded in big bounds away over the blowing grass. Jack paid no attention. Poor Jack was tired, too, and his paws were sore from traveling so far. The wagon kept on jolting. The canvas top snapped in the wind. Two faint wheel tracks kept going away behind the wagon, always the same. Pa's back was hunched. The reins were loose in his hands. The wind blew his long brown beard. Ma sat straight and quiet, her hands folded in her lap. Baby Carrie slept in a nest among the soft bundles. Oh, wow. Mary yawned, and Laura said, Ma, can't we get out and run behind the wagon? My legs are so tired. No, Laura, Ma said. Aren't we going to camp pretty soon? Laura asked. It seemed such a long time since noon when they had eaten their lunch sitting on the clean grass in the shade of the wagon. Pa answered, Not yet. It's too early to camp now. I want to camp now. I'm so tired, Laura said. Then Ma said, Laura. That was all, but it meant that Laura must not complain. So she did not complain anymore out loud. But she was still naughty inside. She sat and thought complaints to herself. Her legs ached and the wind wouldn't stop blowing her hair. The grass waved and the wagon jolted, and nothing else happened for a long time. We're coming to a creek or a river, Pa said. Girls, can you see those trees ahead? Laura stood up and held to one of the wagon boughs. Far ahead, she saw a low, dark smudge. That's trees, Pa said. You can tell by the shape of the shadows. In this country, trees mean water, and that's where we'll camp tonight. So you can see, even back in the late 1800s, that children traveling on long trips with their parents were just the same as they are today. They get tired of sitting, and they start to get whiny, and they start to argue and be disagreeable. So that has not changed, has it? So way back before they got in the covered wagon, Pa was telling, back on page 6, Pa was saying, telling about what it was going to be like a little bit in the West. And he explained that they would see Indians and that Laura could see a papoose. The exact sentence is, what is a papoose, she asked him. And he said, a papoose is a little brown Indian baby. So let's set our book aside and let's take out our vocabulary sheet and very neatly and very small, right underneath where it says papoose or on the back of the sheet in the box, we want to write down what Pa said. He said it is a little Indian baby. Okay, everybody needs to write that down. A little Indian baby. And while you're writing that, I'm going to talk about, so here would be like Pepin, the town that they came to. And they talk about it being on a lake, but what really was the case was it was the Mississippi River. So here's the other shore of the Mississippi, and the Mississippi got like this, and then it kind of widened out like that, and then it comes back together and gets smaller again. So the people, not having traveled much in that area, called this part here a lake. But really, it's part of the Mississippi River. And so they had to go across to the other side where the little house was that they camped in. And that had to be done while it was iced over in Wisconsin. The Mississippi River actually ices over thick enough that a wagon could drive across it. Now, the scary thing about that was that they had waited pretty long, and it was pretty late in the season. And so the night that they were in the other little cabin, ice started to crack, and they were really lucky. They were really lucky that they didn't go down into the bottom of the lake, or the bottom of the river, not the lake, and die. So now let's go to our trifle, and everybody find this page. And at the top, we want to write down 3 reasons for why they decided to pack everything up in a wagon and head west. I'm going to let you guys write for a minute, and then we'll talk about it. So, go. And I'm going to write while you're writing. Lit on my marker there. All right, so that's been about a minute. And the first 2 reasons that I have written down on the board, and I'll put that right up where you can see it, were directly from the book. The third one is something that I know about from Little House in the Big Woods. And if you've ever read that, then you would know it too. So I have it written down here. So you may not have been able to think of 3. So the first one is there were too many people. It said that Pa did not like being so crowded in, and they were starting to hear axes and gunshots that were other people, and he didn't like having that many people living close to them. Number 2, there were not as many animals. With more people coming into the woods, you get more people hunting, and there wasn't as many animals available, and Pa was beginning to be worried that he could not provide meat for his family to eat. And then the last reason is it was hard to farm in the forest. And that was discussed a lot in her first book, Little House in the Big Woods, about cutting down the trees, digging out the tree stumps, and digging up all of the rocks in that area that were left by ancient glaciers before you could even plow the land. So he wanted a flat land that would be easier to plow, where there would not be as many people, and there would be more animals for hunting. He liked to be where it was more spread out. I'm going to hold that there for about a minute and let you get it copied down. If you don't have it, you should be. You know how things run. And then we'll mark the map. Okay. Now you're going to need a marker or a crayon to color on the map. So I'm going to let you go and get that while I erase my board. All right, so at the very bottom, we are going to be marking and coloring the states that they traveled through. So we want to start out, fold this, I can get it up as close as possible to you. We want to start out with the state of Wisconsin, which is right here. That one right there. So you're going to color that one. And then they went across the Mississippi River to the state next to it, which is Minnesota. So here is Wisconsin. Over here, and here is Minnesota. And then they traveled south through Iowa, so we want to color Iowa. And then down through Missouri, over here. So Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri. They did not go into Nebraska, but they came into Kansas here where it says Indian Territory right there, or United States, excuse me. So make sure that you colored Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, and Kansas. All right. So tomorrow, that's the end of our first chapter lesson. Tomorrow there's going to be two lessons. There's going to be one about covered wagons, and we're going to look at how big they are and what kind of things they took with them and how they worked. And then we'll do chapter 2 as well. So tomorrow you're going to need your book and your vocab and your trifold, and you're also going to need to find a paper that was in the packet called Moving Now and Then. All right, see you tomorrow.